Alright everyone, I'm finishing up a book called The Mystic Oracle, which is predominantly about dream interpretation, like 99% of its content. It's quite good and quite lengthy, and it'll be ready within a few days. But I wanted to do the Occult video 232, sort of a companion to that work that I'm doing, Dream Interpretation the Old-Fashioned Way. Now, at this point, I think this is like the dozenth oracle slash fortune-telling work, like in the purest sense, that I've edited. Dream interpretation forms a part or a whole of many of these works. Usually, with a fortune teller, you've got several different aspects. You've got the oracle tradition, which is like with the philosophical Merlin or the Napoleon's Oraculum. It's like a drawn figure or some system for telling a fortune, prognostication. Dream interpretation is another, and then divination based on astrology is another. Towards the end period of the oracle works, this seems to disappear mostly. Astrology becomes less important than divination in the parlor game sense, like with dice and dominoes and cards and stuff like that. That sort of overtakes the popularity of classical astrology. But within regards to the dream interpretation, I've noticed some strong features that sort of stick throughout, this roughly 150, 200 year period in which these works were in vogue. And it may be longer. I haven't found anything from the 17th century. The earliest works I'm finding that deal with this tradition that can be sort of traced through this lineage are from the middle of the 1700s, middle of the 18th century, with the Book of Knowledge, among other things. The astrological traditions are definitely older, but as far as the rest of the bulk, it sort of starts there. The oracle side appears to begin around the dawn of the 19th century, early 1800s, and then they sort of fuse together along with some of the dream interpretation. One important thing, though, in almost all of these dream interpretation works, one thing is very clear, and that's the principle of inversion. For example, death and marriage. In I think all of the works that I've edited so far, and I wouldn't be surprised if it turns out to be all the works in general. Like, to dream of getting married means impending death. Not necessarily yours in all traditions, but an impending death, loss of life. Being at a funeral or seeing dead bodies likewise betokens marriage or the run-up to it, relationship changes, usually of a positive nature. That is, if you imagine that yourself laying in a coffin and awake, like, oh shit, I'm dead, it means that you'll be married. If you are already married, in some it means an increase in domestic bliss, or a remarriage like the death of a spouse, the finding of a new one, problems in a relationship potentially, and vice versa. This inversion is throughout these various works, where one thing that is seen as sort of the opposite of the other, like marriage as a stage of life. It's the lead up to creating life, children, in the classical sense. In the time period, that was the stated goal, was to get married, to have those kids, but they refer to Venus and nuptial rights enough in some of these works that it's kind of obvious that they were enjoying the other part of marriage too, and they weren't quite as big of sticklers for moralism as you think. Especially in the 18th century works, my God. They talk about, oh, you're in danger of getting STDs, basically. I mean, they're talking about like whoring around in some of these works. To dream of, I can't remember exactly, in Mrs. Bridget's dream interpretation, I think it was, like from the late 1700s, it was like, so there was one particular dream, oh, if a young maiden dreams of this, she's in danger of becoming a strumpet, which means a hooker. So they knew that these things actually happened back then. They did understand sexual intercourse was for more than producing children. There's a reason that there were whores. Very, very amusing. Yeah, your great-great-grandparents slept around a hell of a lot more than you think. Dude, people sleep around less now than they did back in the 18th century anyway. It was cheaper back then, for one thing, because of the way people tended to be very poor anyway. It was cheaper, number one, and also there were fewer STDs going around. They didn't have AIDS to worry about back in the 18th century. Another thing, though, that I've noticed is that in some cases you have tropes that go beyond sort of inversion, like toads in the Mystic Oracle is considered a very negative thing to see. Here you've got, this supposedly venomous reptile, as they label it back in the pre-biological era. In the era prior to fully modern science, toads were a venomous reptile. They didn't quite understand them. These and mushrooms are seen as a negative thing. Things that we would traditionally associate with spooky imagery, black cats and stuff, oftentimes to dream of them or to see them in real life were considered negative omens. For everything else, there's inversion. Like a thunderstorm is auspicious. To be tossed about at sea with a great storm, actually in this particular work, and I think in all the others I've read, is the forerunner to good things. I guess the sort of psychological idea is, well, the storm is here, but it's passing, and so you got to go through it. When you wake up, you've passed through the storm. Well, it must be clear weather, and so it's sort of a metaphorical sort of thing that brings about good fortune. Dream interpretation is definitely one of the most interesting things that I've been delving into with regards to the works that I'm editing. I'd like to compile all of these things into sort of a massive tome of dream interpretation. I'm thinking about doing that, like reinterpreting all of it, like putting it all together, giving it a sort of a modern twist, and releasing a new fortune-telling work. Actually, along those lines, I could even introduce astrology and stuff, and maybe even make my own oracle system. It'd be just as effective. I do, by the way, occasionally consult oracles of this nature, and I mean that in the literal sense. They don't seem to be wrong. They seem to be pretty good at guiding. I think part of that is in the generalistic manner of their construction, but yes, I do believe in divination to an extent. And I'm not a hardcore proponent of it. I don't sit there, with a cootie catcher and a Ouija board and say, well, I've got to find out what I'm doing tomorrow. But in a general sense, psychologically speaking, I think it's a positive thing. It's a sort of a parlor game sort of thing too. People get together, especially young adults. They talk about their dreams. They do witchy shit, and that's sort of a time-honored thing. By the way, if your teenagers are like using the Ouija board, don't worry about them getting possessed. It's not going to happen. People back in the 1700s were doing similar things. Yeah, it's not a big problem. They're not actually contacting demons. At most, they're unleashing their subconscious, and they're having fun doing it. And then, of course, one of them had a dream that means that she's going to become a strumpet, and then they play, 7 Minutes of Heaven, or whatever they call it now. Yeah, you might have a grandkid on the way, but, at least they're not demonically possessed. At least it's not going to be like, the kid from The Exorcist, so don't worry too much about it. So, yeah, in the description, you can definitely go to my books blogs if you want to see some of the fortune-telling works. A lot of them are quite good. I think the Universal Fortune Teller of Mrs. Bridget is good. This one, the Mystic Oracle that I'm working on now, the Mystic Dream Book, or whichever one it's called, is quite good as well. So that's more lengthy dream interpretation. It's about 140 pages, so it's on the beefier side with regard to some of these fortune-telling works. That's about all. Peace out.